Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords. And I'm glad to see all of you again, my shitlord army. And I've got some very, very exciting news, some very good news, I think. This is going to surprise you perhaps, but there's very strong evidence now that the Wokists have run out of groups to claim that gamers are prejudiced against. That's good news, I think. They've run the whole gamut. They've tried everything already. They said we're sexist, we're racist, rape culture, we're against indigenous people, we're anti-gay, we're anti-trans, we're ageist. I don't know. I don't know what else. I don't know which again. We don't like handicapped people. We're anti-vegan. All of those things. They've tried everything, and we know that this is true because the other day an article came out once again about tabletop gaming and how horribly prejudiced we are, that was just so very clear that they'd run out of every other option that it was really telling, because it was the most ridiculous thing you could imagine, right? It's like, it's one thing, let's say if you get the National Tango Dancing Association, you say that they're prejudiced against black people, right? Well, that might or might not be true, right? But if you said the National Tango Dancing Association is prejudiced against Argentinians or Latinos, right? Then probably that's probably not real, right? That's probably not right, you know? So Wired, an institution that was once an interesting magazine, has come out with an article claiming that tabletop role-playing games and D&D and that sort of thing are fundamentally prejudiced against people who are neurodivergent. So for those of you who are not up to the latest lingo, neurodivergent is a category that basically means people who are autistic, right? Who are in the autistic spectrum, have what we used to call Asperger's. That word apparently is no longer in vogue. And, so autism is a wide spectrum, obviously, but of things everywhere from people who are practically catatonic to people who are very high functioning, but clearly have some atypical behavior issues that are probably because of the hardwiring of their brains and not a question of, conditioned, nature versus nurture stuff here. So anyways, they're claiming that autistic people are unwelcome at the tabletop, Now, if you're a gamer, I mean, the first thing this article proves is that there's not one person left working for Wired who is actually a computer geek, right? Or a geek at all. There's no geeks left working in Wired. It's all been taken over by blue-haired feminists and their simp male allies hoping for pity hand jobs. These are all people who have no connection to the thing that it was supposed to be, right? Wired, when it came out in 1993, I think it was a very kind of cutting edge magazine about technology and futurism, and it presented itself as like the Rolling Stone of computers and technology, and it was quite an exciting magazine, actually. It often had very good articles about the frontiers of technology and ideas and things like that, right? That was all, by the way, that was back when Rolling Stone was also still kind of a good magazine. It was already going quite downhill from its peak in the 70s, but it was still a more or less good magazine. Nowadays, both of these are just propaganda institutions for the woke leftist establishment, right? They're just useless, beyond useless. And they're probably going to go away soon, just like, happily we can say that, Vice News is going away now. But they were, once they were cool too, right? This whole thing is, these institutions get subverted, they get taken over and transformed from what their original purpose was. Much like Wizards of the Coast, right? Transformed what their original purpose was into the purpose of being indoctrination points in the propaganda system to try to force people to accept the hyper-normalized reality that the managerial globalist elite want for us, right? That's basically what's happening here. They're trying to force everyone to pretend to believe things that deep down everybody knows is not true, so that you will continue to obey the people in control. Because if you're forced to agree something that's a lie, that weakens you. That makes you that forces you to be complicit in that lie, and therefore you are suddenly trapped from being able to effectively resist until the moment you decide to stop doing that. You take the red pill and then you wake up about it, right? But anyways, their goal in this is to try to now claim that D&D, people with Asperger's, can no longer cannot play D&D. We're never able to play D&D. It was always an area where we were filled with prejudice against them, and that without the special help of left-wing danger-haired feminists to transform the game and transform the way people play the game and get a whole bunch of people out of the game, unless those things happen, then people with Asperger's, how could they ever hope to play D&D, right? And this is so goddamn funny. In case any of you listening to this are people who have never actually played RPGs, and you're wondering, well, hang on, I'm confused. I'm not getting the point here, right? The point is that there is no hobby, except for maybe like model trains. Model trains, I think, is maybe even more of this, but almost every other hobby, we're definitely right at the very near top of hobbies that have been accepting of that particular group of people, right? Of people who are neurodivergent, so to say. I think anybody who's gamed recognizes this. And, I'm speaking as someone who is not neurodivergent myself, unless you count the fact that I have a considerably higher than average IQ as a kind of divergency, which I guess in some of a sense it is. I was actually lucky. I'm not a genius level IQ, right? I've just got a very high IQ. It doesn't quite get to genius level. So I'm at that sweet spot where a lot of times I will be the smartest guy in the room, but I'm not so far out there that I become essentially, because people that have an IQ of 140 and above are essentially just as socially crippled as, say, somebody who has semi-serious levels of Asperger's syndrome, right? That you just don't know how to interact with human beings anymore. And so I was always in a very kind of cool spot, right? I'm at that farther end of the hump, but I'm not so far out there that I can't relate to other people. And that means I've been able to operate in a lot of different social situations. And so as someone who's operated in a lot of different social situations, I can certainly see that the level of tolerance and acceptance that RPGs as a hobby have, and I mean in many parts of the world, because I've been in many parts of the world, so I'm also a world traveler. There's no argument by which you can claim to me that my experience is only a limited anecdotal sampling. It's not. It's an example of many different places where I've role played, and of contextually comparing this to other institutions that I am also a part of, that I know that would not be able to as easily integrate the same people, right? People who are neurodivergent, to use that term, are extremely welcome in RPGs and always have been, right? I can say also, as somebody who's been role-playing for many, many decades now, since the early 80s, that this has always been the case. It's always been the case. And I mean that there's always been a few principal groups that make up gamers, The first and probably the majority of these would be people that I would say are not neurodivergent, but are certainly non-conforming. And the non-conforming people, of which I guess I'm definitely one of them, are people that were either kind of like, members of that fringe of their society in some way. People that were renegades or rebels against society. So you had, in the early 80s when I started gaming, I've told this story before in other videos, right? That when I started in junior high to play D&D, at my table, I was easily the geekiest guy, right? I was there because I was kind of the nerd, and so they wanted me to dungeon master because they figured I'd know the rules better. If they'd had someone who was actually neurodivergent, then they might have known the rules better, right? But anyways, everybody else at that table were all either heavy metal kids or punk kids, right? And so at that time in the 80s, those movements of, countercultural movements were also very closely tied to RPGs. By the time I was in high school, I was the least geeky kid at the table. And that was because those groups, those sort of countercultures had kind of disappeared. And the countercultures that then tied into RPGs were people like, anime geeks, or as we used to call it, Japanimation geeks. So that tells you how old I am. I remember when we used to call it Japanimation. And then later you had the Goths, right, in the early 90s when Vampire came out, and suddenly you had this all these goth kids that, and would be witches and whatever that were playing RPGs. And all of those groups were always accepted. Everybody was accepted. I can't recall in decades of gaming of anybody being rejected because of the category of demographic group they were in. Not women, not LGBT people, not people of a certain color, none of those. I can certainly remember a lot of individual people being rejected because of their own individual personalities, including some people who were neurodivergent. But that wasn't a sign that there was an overall prejudice against neurodivergent people in gaming. On the contrary, right? The second group, next to Outcasts, the second biggest group, were the neurodivergent people, right? Were people who were not just socially outside of the norm, let's say outside of the mainstream. They were people who had physical differences or cerebral or mental differences that made them, by their nature, not inside the mainstream central norm, right? And so those people were very welcome in RPGs right from the start. I've met so many people over the years that whether diagnosed or not, that you had to assume that they were in some way in that spectrum, right? And a lot of them are very good gamers. Some of them have some limitations that maybe other gamers don't have. The third group, by the way, is normies, mainstream people. There's always a few guys. There's a few people that are just totally regular guys, but they're like, yeah, but I just really like to play a barbarian, and so they want to play D&D, and they enjoy it. And usually they don't take it quite as seriously as the other two groups, but the ones that take it the most seriously are usually the neurodivergent people. Those are the persons at the table are going to have memorized everything in the book, right? I know that there's at least some people that I currently game with that are in that spectrum. And I know that a lot of times, most of the games I run nowadays are with books that I myself have written, right? I'm the author of the book and I'm running the book, but there's a lot of times where I'm going to get a certain player who will know a rules detail that I would have had to look up. I wrote the book, but I'd have to look it up. But they know it because to them, part of the thing they do when they game, they're going to read the whole book. And they're going to read it meticulously. And they're going to try to study and understand all of the rules and the intricacies of how the rules interact with each other, right? And they're also the ones that'll point out where, much to my and my publisher's chagrin, where there are typos, So this is these are people who have certain skills that end up actually being extremely suitable to the RPG environment. Then they might lack certain others, like some of the people, but not all. I mean, there are some people who are neurodivergent that are extremely capable of role-playing a character. And it becomes, I think, a kind of technique for them of being able to develop adaptations to interact better with people in general, which is also, I think, a thing that is true, right? That I suspect that people who are neurodivergent, so to say, and become tabletop gamers get certain skills that will be to their advantage in everyday society from it, more so than most people get. I think everybody can get a few skills out of it. At the very least, if you're a kid and you're playing RPGs, you're doing a lot of adding, subtracting, you're figuring out odds, so those are good learning in general. Plus you're reading because you're reading the books and everything, and that's useful. But if you're a kid who has trouble being able to know how to act right, in front of people, and learning how to pretend to be someone different than you are in a way that ends up being being effective, that can be a very important social tool for your interaction in the world, right? So that's a big advantage for it. But in any case, the point is that there's no moment in the history of gaming, like you can't really make any of the arguments that Wokists have been making about gamers being gatekeeping for reasons of either sex, gender, race, or certainly neurodivergency, right? It's just stupid. Those are stupid arguments. There's never been a group that I have seen that is more immediately unconcerned, not just accepting, it's unconcerned. That's the real problem. That's the real thing that makes the Wokists hate tabletop and makes them lie about it and make such bold-faced lies, like, for example, suggesting that people with autism have never been welcomed at D&D tables, right? Like, that's just insane. That's an insane statement to make. It's such an insane, bold-faced lie that they demand that you agree to, right? That's the whole point. The point is a loyalty test to see if you're obeying the establishment. But the reason that they do this is because it's not just that gaming has always been accepting and inviting of people's differences, right? It's that gaming has never given a two-penny crap about the differences between people. And that's what they can't tolerate, right? It would be one thing, it'd be bad enough, right, if there was actual gatekeeping in the game, in the hobby of the game. But the real problem is actually not, it's not that we're not accepting, right? If we made a big deal about, oh yeah, we're accepting and we recognize that your Filipino culture will be recognized at our gaming table every session. And before we open, we have to note that we're on occupied land that was taken by white people from some Indian tribe 400 years ago. And, before that Indian tribe took it from some other Indian tribe a few hundred years before that. And, but we don't do all that. If we did all that, then, well, obviously they'd be using us in other ways. But it's not the fact that we don't do that, but it's the fact that we don't also gatekeep, that rather gamers historically have been famously uncaring about who or what you are outside of the gaming table, right? It's the fact that we are, for the most part, very much a meritocracy that is not just colorblind, but is blind to almost any feature that does not have to do with the game itself. And that in itself is a trait that can be very appealing to people who are neurodivergent, right? Because why would we care about that, right? Just look, if you're just focused on the thing that is here and is rational, it doesn't make a lot of sense to most people to care about those differences, right? And certainly if you're neurodivergent, you're going to be especially confused as to why these things that seem like lies have to be accepted as truths, right? The idea that, two people have to be seen as fundamentally different because of the color of their skin, which just seems stupid to you, right? And because it's stupid to everybody, right? But gaming has never cared about that. Gaming has always said, well, all we care about is whether you're going to show up on time for the game, whether you're going to, steal someone else's snacks and never bring any yourself, that's something we might care about. We're going to care about how well you play your character, whether you disrupt the group or not, like whether if you're being an asshole to the other players, that's something we're going to care about. But, we don't care who you're sexually attracted to, right? Or we don't care about, the color of your skin. and we really, we don't care about what other problems you have outside of the table, actually. We're here to game, man. And that is what they can't stand. This is actually an article, this Wired article is an article written by people that hate neurodivergent people, because neurodivergent people are very unlikely to adopt their ridiculous lies, right? And so they want to co-opt this. And the only way that they can justify this is from the fact that now there is a larger mainstream level of activity, of acceptance of RPG. So there's a lot of casual gamers who are mainstream normies. And those are the people who are most likely to believe the bullshit arguments of the woke, of the woke, how do you say it? The woke commissars. They're the ones that are most afraid of them, that will most accept them. Some of them are avid participants in it for their own motives, because there's, most normies are fundamentally uninteresting human beings, right? So they need to find some way to make themselves interesting, right? It's like, why are there so many white middle class, upper middle class women who are huge campaigners against racism? It's because they realize that as white upper middle class women, they're the most privileged human beings on earth. And that makes them uninteresting. Well, so they've got to pick. They either have to go to every Black Lives Matter march, or they have to pick one of their kids and convince them to start dressing as the opposite gender. Right? This is the bourgeois nature of what used to be called social communism. Right? It's a co-option of these revolutionary of real revolutionary ideas by an imaginary revolution that actually accomplishes nothing, except that it maintains the power of incompetent bourgeois bureaucrats in control of things. So yeah, the only way that they can get the influence over gaming was to try to import a bunch of casuals into the hobby, specifically in D&D, and that's something that has been to some degree successful, in part because 5th edition was so successful. And then they're trying to capture that group that have only been playing D&D for a couple of years. They have no idea about the history of D&D. They have no idea about how it was something, because again, a lot of them are also quite young, right? I mean, they're not all teenagers or anything. But a lot of them are at least millennials. They weren't around in the 80s and 90s, right? Or if they were very, very young. So they don't know that this was a hobby, and it's always been a hobby that has been generally very open and very uncaring, colorblind, as it were, of any kind of social divisions. So they can be convinced, and they will be convinced because they have been trained their entire lives to be convinced by whatever the leftist propagandists say to them. So that's what who this article is written for. It's just absurd, right? I mean, they've run out of things to claim that we're, I guess next they'll have to say we're like mean to dogs or something, because like there's not, if you're now trying to pretend that people with Asperger's were not welcome at D&D tables, have never been welcome at D&D tables, you've run out. You've hit the end of the barrel, right? There's nothing after that. Anyways, I guess that's everything I had to say for today. Whether or not you're neurodivergent, please hit the like button, subscribe, share this video everywhere you can share it, whether it's where you think somebody will find it interesting or if you think it'll piss somebody off. Thanks, by the way, to Taylor Lane for having tweeted this article at me, because I might have found it on otherwise, but actually that was where it was first brought to my attention. And if you want to help me out, check out my products, right? Sword and Caravan, Invisible College, Gonzo Fantasy Companion, Lion and Dragon, Arrows of Indra, Star Adventure. You've got so many gaming products, all of them, OSR books that are interchangeable with each other, with other OSR products, and with D&D based games that you can use in your campaigns. And they're all meant to be played, to be run. They're not political propaganda. They're not virtue signaling. They're not even trying to own the libs or something like that, right? They're all gaming books, and they're about gaming. And you will find stuff there, whether you're looking for like really serious, authentic stuff based on history and mythology, or whether you're looking at like wild and crazy adventuring with like weird fantasy and magic combined, or whether you're looking at modern day adventuring with really interesting occult elements and conspiracies and things like that, you're going to find a book for you. Check out also the RPG Pundit Presents series. If you don't have a lot of money, There's 108 issues of the RPG Pundit Presents PDFs, and you're bound to find some topic out of those so far that are going to be interesting to you. I was talking to Spectre Press, and they're going to be coming out with some more Pundit Presents books fairly soon, I hope. That's what I was told anyways. So keep your eyes open for that. And again, share this video everywhere you think people will like it. Currently smoking Stanwell 2019 Pipe of the Year, plus Argento Roots.